In today's lesson, we are going to talk about multiplication and division of real numbers. So the first thing in this lesson, we are going to talk about the multiplying rules. You can see them listed. The product, which means multiply, of two real numbers with the same sign is positive. The product of two real numbers with different signs, like one is positive and one is negative, the outcome is negative. And the product of any real number and zero is zero. So just to go back and kind of hopefully refresh your memory on multiplication, you have different signs in problem number 1. You have a +4 and a negative. So according to the rule, the second rule, product of two numbers with different signs, the outcome is negative. Now you need to worry about multiplying 13 and 4 together. That would be 52. So your outcome is negative 52 because they have different signs. And number 2, they also have different signs, so automatically you know your outcome is going to be negative. Now, to multiply decimals, we're going to take 2.5 and multiply it by 0.7. That gives me 7 times 5, which is 35, carry the 3. 7 times 2 is 14 plus 3 is 17. Now, where do we put the decimal? You don't do it like adding. You don't just bring it straight down. I have 2 decimal places within the problem, so I need 2 decimal places in my answer. Now, we already decided that this outcome is negative, so 1.75 negative is the final answer. Now, we're going to multiply two numbers with the same sign. So when they have the same sign, the outcome is always positive. I don't care if it's a positive times a positive or a negative times a negative, the outcome is positive. So I know my outcome is going to be positive. 5 goes into 15 3 times. 7 goes into 14 2. So my outcome is positive 2/3. Because remember, a negative times a negative produces a positive. Now, here's a little shortcut when you have to multiply more than just two numbers together. So this says the product of an even number of negative factors is positive. The product of an odd number of negative factors is negative. So what they mean by that, if you notice, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 negative numbers. 4 numbers is an even number of negatives, so we have 4 negative numbers, so the outcome is always going to be positive. And then we focus on multiplying 2 times 6 times 3. That gives me positive 36. Now we have 4 negatives, and that produces a positive outcome. Oh, excuse me. I apologize. For number 5, I have an odd number of negatives. I have 3 negative numbers. So my outcome is automatically going to be negative. And then all I have to do is worry about multiplying 10 times 4 times 7, which is 280. So that would be negative 280 because we have 3 negatives. Exponential expressions. Okay, so an exponential expression with a negative base is written with parentheses around the base. So if you notice, to evaluate negative 2 with parentheses to the 6th power means to multiply the base negative 2 together 6 times. Well, if you have 6 negative numbers, the outcome is going to be positive. Now, if the parentheses are not used, this is extremely important, and this is where some of you are going to have difficulties, and I want you to go ahead and think about this now. If there are not parentheses, then you do not include the negative. So it has a totally different meaning. So the expression negative 2 to the 6th power without parentheses has a base of 2. Not negative 2, because if they wanted the negative to be included, they would have put parentheses around it. So this problem can be interpreted as -1 times 2 to the 6th power. So your outcome would be negative. So in these 4 examples, we're going to go over the use of parentheses versus not having parentheses. So in the first example, I do not have any parentheses, including the negative with the 8. So I should be thinking -1 times 8 squared, and that's -1 times 8, which is -64. Now in the second example, it looks very similar to number 6, but it is not similar to number 6 because I have the negative included in the parentheses. So that would be -8 times -8, which is +64. So please pay attention to the grouping symbols when you have them and when you do not. If the negative is not included in a grouping symbol, it is not included with the exponent. So in number 10, since the negative is inside the group, it stays and the exponent applies. So -1/3 times -1/3 times -1/3 would be -1/27. Now, in the last example, number 11, we are going to take -1 and multiply that by 3 to the 3rd power. Since we do not have any grouping symbols, you cannot put that -1 with that exponent. So that would be -1 times 3 times 3 times 3, which is -27. So be very, very careful with when you have groups and when you do not. Now, division of real numbers, went a little bit too far. Division of real numbers, the sign rule is the same, okay? So let's talk about reciprocals first. The reciprocal of a number that's not 0, a non-zero number, has a reciprocal. If the number is A, then you flip the number. So 4 has a reciprocal of 1/4. 2/3 has a reciprocal of 3/2. Notice that I'm flipping the number. -6 has a reciprocal of -1/6. You keep the sign and you flip the number. Now, division of real numbers, as long as you are not dividing, excuse me, I'm struggling with this video today. As long as you are not dividing by 0, you're fine, as long as your B value is not 0. So in this problem, if you see a division problem, then you multiply by the reciprocal. Now, if you notice the rule, the quotient of 2 real numbers with the same sign is positive. The quotient of 2 numbers with different signs is negative. The quotient of 0 in any number is 0. And what this means is 0 divided by a number will equal to 0. Now, the quotient of any non-zero number and 0 is undefined. That means if you take a number and you divide it by 0, that is an undefined value. Now, the way I remember these 2 rules right here is I remember okay versus no. It is okay to have 0 in the top, but it is not okay to have 0 in the bottom. You can remember it however you want, but that's just a little shortcut trick that I remember from way back in high school, and I won't tell you how long ago that was. Now, when we divide, check your rules first. You are dividing 2 negative numbers, so your outcome is going to be positive. Now, I simply divide the numbers. What is 45 divided by 3? It is 15. So my answer is positive 15. 0 divided by any number is just 0. Here I have a positive 8.1. Fraction bar means division, divided by 0.3. Now, I know my outcome is going to be negative because I have a positive number divided by a negative. And just in case you forgot how to divide using decimals, the 8.1 goes under the radical, the 0.3 goes out in front. Well, you cannot have the 0.3 out in front, so you're going to have to move the decimal. So I'll move the decimal one place here, which means I move it here. So technically, I have 3 going into 81, or 81, that looks like a square root. I apologize, that should not be a square root. 3 goes into 81 27 times. We had already established that our answer was going to be negative because a positive divided by a negative, they have different signs, and that is your rule. When they have different signs, the outcome is negative. In number 15, our outcome is going to be positive. And the reason it is going to be positive is because you have a negative divided by a negative. They have the same sign. So I have 7 over 5 divided by 35, which means I'm going to rewrite it using my division rule as 7 over 5 times the reciprocal of 35, which is 1 over 35. 7 goes into 35 5 times, so my final outcome is positive 1 over 25. Now, you do not have to put the plus sign in front of it. If you don't have a sign in front, it's automatically understood to be positive. I know you know that. As a teacher, I just have to say it. Now, I cannot divide by 0, so this is undefined. Number 16 is undefined. Now, order of operations, this is where it gets kind of tricky. So we still use the same rules. We have addition and we have multiplication. So we're going to multiply first. So I have negative 12 plus negative 6. Now I switch to my rules for adding. When I multiply different signs, I get a negative answer. But when I add same signs, I keep the sign. Here, I am going to multiply. So I get negative 12. I apologize. No, you don't. Bad teacher. Bad teacher. You do not multiply first. Order of operation says you either divide or multiply, whichever one you get to first. I apologize. My fault. So I'm going to divide first, and then I will multiply these two negative numbers together. When I divide, I get negative 6 because I'm dividing a positive and a negative number. And when I multiply, I get positive 18 because you are multiplying two negative numbers together. I apologize for my mistake there. Now, in the last 4 examples that we are going to do, we are going to tackle some problems that are a lot bigger with order of operations. So in the first problem, number 19, we're going to tackle the numerator first, get one number, and then tackle the denominator. So it's almost like working 2 different problems in one. So I multiply, I get negative 15. I add 6, I get negative 9 as my numerator. And then I'm going to do the bottom, which would be 12 plus negative 2 times 6. You multiply before you add, so 12 plus negative 12 gives me 0. Well, you cannot divide by 0, so the first problem is undefined. In the second problem, if you notice, the second problem is same. Number 20 is almost the same as number 19, so I'm not going to go through all of it again. So across the top, I'm going to get 12 plus negative 12, and that gives me 0 on the top. On the bottom, I get negative 15 plus 6, which is negative 9. Notice that it's just number 19 flipped, but the outcome is 0. It is okay to have 0 in the top of your fraction. You just cannot have it in the bottom of the fraction. Now, the last 2 examples that we are going to do, we have 2 grouping symbols. So I need one number inside the absolute value, and then I need to get one number inside the parentheses. So I'm going to deal with the absolute value first. Negative 8 plus 3 stays the absolute value of negative 5, and the absolute value of negative 5 is 5. We are going to divide that by, now, negative 3 squared, remember that's the same as negative 1 times 3, which gives me negative 9 plus 4, which is negative 5. And when you take 5 and divide it by negative 5, you get negative 1. When you divide sign, or when you divide two numbers with different signs, the outcome is always negative. Now, in the last example, we are going to take what's under the radical. So I'm going to come over here in my workspace. I need a common denominator. So 3/4 minus 2/4, that would give me 1/4. So the square root of 1/4 divided by negative 8. When I take the square root of 1/4, I get 1/2. The square root of 1, I should be thinking square root of 1 is 1, and the square root of 4 is 2. And I'm going to divide that by negative 8. So I know my outcome is going to be negative because a positive divided by a negative is always a negative. When I divide by negative 8, I actually multiply by the reciprocal. So I'm going to multiply by 1/8. So that would give me negative 1/16 as a final answer. So I hope this helps kind of go back over the rules for multiplying and dividing. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. And again, I apologize for sneezing and coughing throughout this lesson. So just kind of overlook those moments. Thank you.